What if everything you believed your whole life was wrong? Felix spent years convinced that he could never be a father. He built his life around this certainty, keeping his distance from any emotional bond that could break him. But one night changed everything. A month later, Angelina, his assistant, gives him the impossible news. She's pregnant with his child. Only Felix doesn't believe it. He rejects her. He doubts it. And with that, he pushes away the only person who really cared about him. But the truth has a cruel way of catching up with us. And when Felix discovers that he may have made the biggest mistake of his life, it may already be too late. Now only one question remains. Will he be able to repair what he has destroyed? Felix typed rapidly on the keyboard, ignoring the clock that was striking almost midnight. The room was silent, lit only by the cold light of the monitor. Outside, the city spread out like a sea of lights, but he didn't have time to admire the landscape. The work required concentration, and he preferred it that way. Silence had always been more comfortable than unnecessary chatter. The office door opened without warning, and Angelina walked in with a steaming cup of coffee. "You need to rest, Felix. You've been at it for hours." He kept his eyes on the screen. "I'll be finished in a few minutes." "I've heard that before." She put her cup down next to him and crossed her arms. "If you carry on like this, you'll pass out on the keyboard." Felix let out a discreet sigh. Angelina had worked with him for years and knew his habits better than anyone, sometimes even too well. "You're here late, too. Someone has to make sure you eat." This time he looked up. Angelina's gaze met his for a second longer than it should have. A silent moment stretched between the two of them, laden with something unspoken. Felix looked away first, returning to the screen. "Thanks for the coffee." She nodded, hesitated for a moment and left, leaving only the warm aroma of the drink in the air. The next day followed the same rhythm: meetings, phone calls, and the constant bustle of the office. Felix maintained his impeccable posture, an irreproachable professional. But whenever Angelina was around, he noticed something different, little details that seemed to mean more than they should. One evening, during a corporate event, the unexpected happened. A heavy storm hit the city, cancelling flights and blocking roads. Felix and Angelina were stuck in a nearby hotel with no way back. "This is absurd!" Felix ran a hand through his hair, looking at his cell phone with no signal. "There's nothing we can do but wait." Angelina held up the room key they had received at reception. "At least we have somewhere to spend the night." The hotel corridors were silent, interrupted only by the sound of the rain against the windows. In the room, the tension between them intensified. Felix took off his tie and sat on the sofa, massaging his temples. Angelina watched him. "Did you ever stop to think that it might be nice not to be working for one night?" He let out a dry laugh. "Not knowing what to do with my free time has never been a problem for me." She studied him for a moment before walking over to the minibar and picking up a bottle of wine. "Then maybe I should learn." She poured 2 glasses and held one out to him. Felix hesitated, but accepted. The wine was smooth, and the silence that followed was different from what they were used to. It wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with something that had been growing between them for a long time. "We've been working together for years," said Angelina, swirling the liquid in her glass. "But sometimes I feel like I know almost nothing about you." Felix frowned. "You know enough. I know how you like your coffee. I know that you always straighten your shirt cuffs before a meeting. I know that you avoid conversations about family." Angelina stared at him. "But that doesn't mean I really know you." Felix was silent for a moment, watching the shadows cast by the light of the lamp. "Some things are easier to keep at a distance." Angelina smiled slightly, as if she had expected this answer. "And that makes you happy?" He didn't answer. The silence that settled in was different this time. Time seemed to slow down when she moved a little closer. Felix smelled her soft perfume, saw the way her eyes shone in the dim light. Felix. His name escaped her lips like a whisper, and he knew in that instant that nothing would ever be the same again. Angelina didn't flinch when he brought his hand up to her face, touching her skin hesitantly. Nor did she pull away when he tilted his head, slowly moving closer. And then it happened. The first kiss was slow, as if they were both testing their limits, but hesitation soon turned to need, and the night enveloped them completely. When the storm finally calmed down, the world had changed for both of them. Felix woke up before dawn. Angelina was still sleeping beside him, her breathing light and quiet. He watched her for a long moment, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. Something inside him warned him that this change could not be ignored. He got up slowly, put on his shirt and walked over to the window. The city was beginning to wake up in the dim morning light. He couldn't deny that that night had meant something. But what exactly did it mean? Felix didn't have that answer. Not yet. Angelina stared at the pregnancy test on the bathroom sink. 2 lines. The result was clear, definitive. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she tried to process reality. Pregnant. She ran her hands over her face, feeling her breathing become irregular. She thought of Felix. She thought of the way he always kept his distance, the invisible wall he never allowed anyone to cross. How would he react? The answer came as a cold whisper in her mind, badly. Over the next few days, Angelina tried to act normally. But every time she saw Felix in the office, her stomach churned, and not just from morning sickness. She had to tell him. There was no putting it off any longer. At the end of the day, she waited until everyone had left. With sweaty hands and a racing heart, she entered his office. Felix was typing something on his computer, as focused as ever. "Felix, I need to talk to you. It's important." He kept his eyes on the screen. "Can it wait?" "No, I'm pregnant." The sound of the keys stopped abruptly. Felix stopped, his eyes fixed on the screen as if her words were still floating in the air. Slowly, he turned his chair to face her. "What?" Angelina swallowed. "I'm pregnant." Disbelief took over Felix's expression. He blinked a few times, as if he expected her to break off the sentence. That's impossible." "No, it's not. I did the test." He stood up, starting to pace around. "There must be some mistake. I can't have children, Angelina." "You have a child now." "I don't." Felix let out a bitter laugh, running his hand through his hair. "I was diagnosed as infertile years ago, so you're wrong." The pain cut Angelina like a blade. "Are you really calling me a liar?" "It's not that." Felix hesitated, his expression hard. "But something's wrong. Maybe the test is wrong. I've taken more than one." Silence fell between the two of them. Felix finally stopped walking, his gaze locked on her, charged with something Angelina couldn't decipher. If that's true, he took a deep breath. Then the father could be someone else. The impact of those words was like a punch in the gut. Are you saying that I betrayed you?" Felix didn't answer. Angelina laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of hurt and indignation. "I should have known." She crossed her arms, her voice shaking with anger. "You'd rather believe an old diagnosis than the woman who worked alongside you for years." Felix looked away. "I can't accept it like that, Angelina." She felt her eyes sting, but refused to shed tears in front of him. "Because you don't have to accept anything. I didn't come here to ask permission. I came because I thought you should know." Felix clenched his fists. "What do you expect me to do?" "Nothing." Angelina took a step back. "Because you've already made it clear what you think of me." She turned and left, closing the door tightly. The silence in Felix's office seemed deafening. Over the next few days, Angelina tried to go about her routine as normal, but nothing seemed the same. Felix wasn't well either. He tried to convince himself that he was right, that it didn't make sense, but every time he was alone, doubt whispered in his ear. The office seemed quieter without Angelina. Felix tried to ignore the discomfort that grew inside him every day. Her absence was palpable, the empty desk, the lack of her coffee at the right time, the absence of the little reminders that always appeared in his diary before he even asked. He was annoyed with himself for missing her so much. But what bothered him even more was the doubt that insisted on tormenting him. If Angelina was lying, why had she been so firm? Why had she looked into his eyes with such hurt and conviction? He pressed his fingers against his temples. He couldn't allow this thought to take root. He knew he couldn't have children, but what if he was wrong? The worry turned into something unbearable. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The doctor's voice answered on the other end. "Doctor, I need an appointment." Hours later, sitting in the doctor's office, Felix felt ridiculous for being there. The doctor reviewed his old diagnosis, leafing through the papers carefully. "How long ago did you receive this diagnosis?" asked the doctor. 7 years. The doctor nodded. "I see. And have you repeated the tests recently?" Felix frowned. "No, but it's not necessary. You said yourself that the infertility was definitive." The doctor looked up. "Felix, medicine evolves, diagnoses change. Infertility doesn't mean absolute impossibility, it means a low probability. Some cases regress over time." Felix's stomach churned. "Are you saying that it's possible that There's a chance." The room seemed to spin for a moment. Angelina was telling the truth. The weight of that conclusion fell on him with crushing force. Felix ran a hand over his face. "I've done something terrible." The doctor remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I denied something that could be true. I said things I should never have said." The doctor tilted his head. "It seems you already know what you need to do." Felix left the office without knowing how to breathe properly. With every step, the guilt grew inside him. He needed to talk to Angelina. He called her. He called until he hit voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Frustrated, he sent a message. "We need to talk. It's important." Nothing. Angelina was determined to ignore him, but he wasn't going to give up. The next day, he learned that she had requested a transfer to another sector of the company. It was proof that she wanted to leave for good. Despair grew inside him. That evening, he drove to her building. Standing in front of the door, he hesitated. What if she sent him away? You deserve that. But he had to try. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. After a few seconds, Angelina opened it. Her gaze hardened at the sight of him. "What are you doing here?" Felix cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" Angelina crossed her arms. "We've already talked. You've made it very clear what you think." "I went to the doctor." She blinked in surprise. "So what?" "I was wrong." Angelina narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Felix took a deep breath. He said that diagnoses change, that it's possible that I've been fertile all this time without knowing it. She stared at him, unmoving. "So now, because a doctor told you, you believe it?" "Angelina, you didn't believe me." Her voice faltered. "You preferred to believe a piece of old paper, rather than the woman who worked by your side for years." Felix's chest tightened. "I was afraid." Angelina laughed humorlessly. "Afraid? You humiliated me, Felix. You called me a liar. You questioned my loyalty, my dignity." "I know that." His voice came out low. "And I regret every word." The silence between them was suffocating. Felix hesitated. "Can I come in?" Angelina didn't answer immediately. Then she slowly took a step to the side, allowing him to enter. He knew this was his last chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The silence inside Angelina's apartment was almost as heavy as the tension between them. Felix looked around. Everything was organized, meticulous, but he noticed a detail he would never have noticed before: the absence of any sign of another person. Not a single piece of male clothing, not a trace of another man in his life. That should have been obvious. But after what he said, Angelina crossed her arms and stood near the door, as if determined not to approach. "Say what you came to say." Felix put his hands in his pockets, trying to contain his nervousness. "I know that apologies aren't enough, but I have to say that I regret what I did." She arched an eyebrow. "What exactly?" He let out a sigh and wiped his hand across his face. "Everything, for not believing you, of saying things that—" He closed his eyes for a second. "I was afraid, Angelina. Afraid of something I never thought was possible for me." Angelina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fear? Does that justify humiliating me? Making me feel like I'm just something?" Felix felt his stomach turn. "I was an idiot. I was stuck with an old diagnosis, stuck with a certainty that kept me safe. The idea of being a father—" Angelina narrowed her eyes. "Does it scare you?" "It used to. But now—" He hesitated. "All I can think about now is what I've lost by being so blind." Angelina looked away. "I spent weeks alone with it, dealing with your rejection, with his lack of confidence." Felix nodded slowly. "I know I've ruined everything, but I want to fix it." She laughed in disbelief. "Fix it? Felix, do you think you can just show up here, say you're sorry, and everything will be fine?" He held her gaze. "No, but I want to try." Angelina wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to protect herself from something. "I can't go through this again. If you want to enter this baby's life, you have to be really here. Not just because you've discovered you can be a father, but because you want to be." Felix took a step forward. "I do, and I'm willing to prove it to you." Angelina watched his every detail, as if trying to find any sign of hesitation. "Do you really want to, Felix, or are you here because you feel guilty?" He took a deep breath. "I feel guilty, yes, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because when I heard the baby's heartbeat for the first time in the doctor's office, I realized how stupid I'd been." Angelina's eyes widened. You did tests?" Felix nodded. "And I heard the heartbeat." He laughed softly, humorlessly. And at that moment I knew. The silence between them was different this time. Softer. Angelina took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Felix didn't look away. "Let me try." She hesitated. Then she slowly nodded. "If you really want to be part of this, come with me to my next appointment." Felix felt his chest tighten. "I'll be there." He knew that this was only the first hurdle, but he also knew that he wouldn't let this chance slip away. Felix waited outside the office, trying to keep his breathing under control. The muffled sound of footsteps and voices echoed down the corridor, but his attention was fixed on the closed door in front of him. Angelina came out of the room with an envelope in her hands. When their gazes met, something inside him flipped. She didn't say anything straight away, just handed him the paper. "Here it is." Felix opened the envelope with hesitant fingers. The scan showed the image of the baby, small, still undefined, but undeniably real. "Your child." He swallowed. "Can I keep this?" Angelina nodded. Felix kept his eyes on the image, trying to process what he was feeling. Fear, yes, but also something different, something he had never felt before. "When's the next appointment?" "In 3 weeks." "I want to go." Angelina studied him for a moment before answering. "Then go. But go because you want to, not because you feel you have to." Felix looked at her and for the first time in a long time realized the real weight of her words. "I want to." Over the next few days, Felix began to change. Angelina noticed. Every morning she found a bottle of ginger tea on his desk, something that helped with the nausea. There were no explanatory notes, but she knew who it was from. One evening, when she left the office later than usual, she found Felix standing at the entrance to the building. "You need a car to get home." She crossed her arms. "I'm fine. I know, but let me do it." There was a long silence before she got into the car. Confidence wouldn't return overnight, but something was changing. At the next appointment, Felix arrived early. Angelina watched him as he waited beside her. He looked nervous, as if he was about to face something much bigger than business meetings and million-dollar contracts. When the doctor turned on the ultrasound, the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Felix held his breath. Is that him?" Angelina nodded, looking at him cautiously. Felix ran his hand over his face. "My God." She reached out hesitantly, touching his hand. Felix entwined his fingers in hers, and for the first time, Angelina felt that he was really there. Time passed. Felix began attending more appointments, learning about each stage of her pregnancy. One day, Angelina found him standing in the meeting room, leafing through a book on parenthood. "Are you studying?" Felix closed the book slowly. "I want to know everything I can." Angelina crossed her arms, studying him. "I didn't expect that from you." He smiled, without looking away. "Neither did I. The 8th month came faster than they had imagined." Angelina no longer tried to push him away. Felix no longer doubted what he felt. On a rainy night, similar to the one when it all began, Angelina felt her first contraction. Felix was in a meeting when he got the call. "Felix, I think it's time." He rushed off. The drive to the hospital seemed longer than any other journey he had ever made. When he reached Angelina's room, he found her sweating, breathing heavily between contractions. He took her hand. "I'm here." She held on tight. The hours dragged by. Felix stayed by her side the whole time, murmuring words of encouragement. Then finally, the baby's cries filled the room. Felix felt the air leave his lungs. The doctor smiled. "Congratulations. It's a boy." Felix looked at Angelina, who was holding the baby with tears in her eyes. When she held out the little one to him, Felix hesitated. "Are you going to hold him or not?" Angelina asked with a small smile. Felix took the baby in his arms. He was so small, so fragile, but so much his. A lump formed in his throat. "Hi, little one." Angelina looked at him. For the first time she saw something different in Felix. He was no longer the man who denied what he felt. He was a father. Felix sat down next to her, holding his son between them. Angelina leaned slightly against him, and Felix felt something break inside him, not in a bad way, but as if something was finally being rebuilt. "I think you've really changed." Felix smiled. "I know I have." The baby wriggled in his arms, and Felix held it tighter. "I'll never leave you." Angelina closed her eyes for a moment. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was peace, and Felix finally understood what happiness was.